glad to meet all of the folks that I don't know. I'll just give you two sentences about my background. I have a long history in energy efficiency in principally low-income communities. I founded and directed the Energy Coordinating Agency in Philadelphia for more than 30 years, and ECA is the largest nonprofit provider of energy services in the state. It provides a lot of services in Philly and in Delaware. I also have a background in workforce development, understand training and the world of workforce. I founded the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, the state's only trade association for energy efficiency companies. And now, as a volunteer in retirement, I direct the Philadelphia Solar Energy Association and work to increase the use of solar energy in the state. So to be specific, we have to double the use of solar energy every year for the next 20 years. So I'm going to switch to Reggie, and I'm going to share my screen and hopefully bring up some slides. And some of you may have seen these before, so just bear with me. I'm going to breeze through these to leave some time for questions. This is actually a little out of date. Can you all see these now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Yep. So these are a little out of date, but I think still, kind of in their main message accurate. Pennsylvania is still the third largest emitter of carbon and greenhouse gases in the nation, behind only Texas and California. And I've highlighted New Jersey here to show you how much lower New Jersey is. And then if you want to scroll on down here, you can find Delaware down here at the bottom somewhere. But, to give you an idea of how important Pennsylvania is and how key it is to get Pennsylvania's emissions under control. So where are these emissions? This is a slide that shows you both the nation and the state, and they're very similar. So the key thing to take away from this is that electricity, which is roughly a third of our emissions, is the most important sector to transition immediately. Because once we transition electricity, we can transition the rest of the economy. So that's why all the push is on electricity. So electricity in Pennsylvania is 29%, and industry is slightly more than that. But once we transition to a clean energy grid, we can electrify transportation, industry, our buildings, and agriculture. So that's the key. All of these sectors flow from electricity. So it's really important to move on electricity immediately. So how are we going to do that? As you all know, we've been talking a lot about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or Reggie. Reggie has been in place. It's the largest and oldest carbon market in the United States. There are two carbon markets in the US. Reggie is in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states. And then in California, there is a totally different, carbon market that serves California, Quebec, and other parts of Canada. These two markets are different. Reggie is electricity only, but the market in the Western states is it's economy wide. So it's all carbon. So these two things are very different. They are compatible. So Reggie credits can be traded in the California market and vice versa. So a wonderful study was performed about 2 years ago by the Acadia Center, and it found, so it asked the question, what benefits have the Reggie states seen since they enacted Reggie? So they've seen all of these benefits. Carbon emissions have fallen by 47%. Electricity prices fell by almost 6%, while prices in non-Reggie states actually increased by over 8%. The gross domestic product in these states grew by 47% compared to about 30% in the rest of the states. It generated $3.2 billion in auction allowance proceeds, almost all of which have been invested in energy efficiency and renewable energy, and almost $6 billion of health benefits have been experienced by the Reggie states. So Reggie covers every state now, from Maine all the way through New England to New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. These two light green states are the most recent to join. And then Pennsylvania, you see this big gray box here in the middle, is the only state in this region which is not a part of Reggie. Reggie is now also moving further south. North Carolina is beginning the early stages of joining Reggie. So Reggie will continue to grow, and it's really, really important that it move into southern states. So how does Reggie work? This little graph tries to summarize everything in one box, so I'll just walk you through this. Reggie places a price on carbon. And if you generate electricity, let's say you're a coal power plant and you generate electricity with a fossil fuel, you must pay for every ton of carbon dioxide that you emit. And since I've been following Reggie, the price has increased from $6.52 to over $9. So the price of carbon is gradually increasing in the Reggie market. And for every ton of CO2 that I emit, I must pay that $9.10 or whatever it is. And I must do that every year. The really important thing about Reggie is that Reggie is a cap and invest program. The cap is set by the state and it is lowered every year. So the cap comes down every year by at least 3%. The cap in Pennsylvania will decline a little more rapidly than that. And as I showed you in this slide, Pennsylvania currently emits 81 million tons of carbon. We're going to be capping 78 million of those tons. So if you multiply 78 million tons of carbon every year by the current price of carbon, which is, let's call it $9, you will get a very large sum. Those funds flow back to the state. The state of Pennsylvania, if Reggie goes into place as it can in January of 22, this coming January, the state of Pennsylvania could receive $700 million in the first year. The amount that Reggie, the amount of carbon under the cap declines. So the amount of money that the state receives every year will depend on whether the price of carbon continues to rise. So we'll see. But I think it's a safe bet to say that carbon will continue to increase in price. The current projections are that by 2025, in only 4 years, carbon in Pennsylvania will decline by 26%, and that by 2050, carbon in the electricity sector will decline by 80% or more. And that's a very, very, very significant improvement over the business as usual case. So how will all this money be invested? According to state law, all proceeds must be invested to improve our air quality. So how do we do that? We remove pollution from the air. And we do that by investing in energy efficiency, by investing in renewable energy, solar and wind particularly, and investing in clean transportation, carbon sequestration, and many other remedies. What are the expected economic and health impacts from Reggie? We expect that Reggie will create, this is very conservative, frankly, but Reggie will create 67,000 new jobs. These are full-time jobs. It will increase the state's gross domestic product by almost $2 billion in the next 9 years. Will save money for the average person. We will save lives, almost 640 lives. We will reduce the severity of asthma and other respiratory illness. We'll provide over $6 billion in health benefits. Much of that is from reducing asthma. As you probably know, in Philadelphia, it is an epidemic and has been for a number of years. And particularly in low-income neighborhoods, asthma is just horrendous. And the cost of that healthcare is extraordinary. So by reducing the severity, by reducing air pollution, we will improve people's health and reduce our healthcare costs. And we'll also reduce the energy burden for low-income and environmental justice communities. And you probably all know this, but an EJ community, an environmental justice community, is defined by the Environmental Protection Agency as a community that has more than 30% low income or minority population. Doesn't have to have both. It can have both, but it's not necessary. And if you go on the DEP's website, you'll find a map of EJ communities statewide. Governor Wolf has made it a priority to focus on EJ communities with the Reggie proceeds. And the current plan is to require at least 40% of this revenue to be spent in EJ communities statewide. That's a massive, that's a transformational level of investment. And frankly, Reggie is transformational for Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania does not invest in clean energy, as you know. We invest in fossil fuels and fracking and plastic and other things, but we do not invest, the state does not invest in clean energy. And this will be an absolute game changer. This is enough money. And the thing about Reggie to remember is that it's not 1 year. Reggie is an ongoing program, an ongoing policy, and it will be producing a really significant ongoing revenue stream to support the transformation Pennsylvania needs to a clean energy economy, a clean energy future. So it's a massive policy, and I urge you all to throw everything you have into supporting it. So where is Pennsylvania in relationship to other states? We used to be a leader back in the Rendell administration. Pennsylvania was one of the first states in the country to have a clean energy portfolio standard. Most states call this a renewable portfolio standard. Our standard is not entirely renewable. And so it is called the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard. It has two tiers. Tier 1 is clean and Tier 2 is not so much. So Tier 1 requires only 8% renewable by 2021, and that flatlined in May. So we are now nowhere. We're just flatlined. We're doing 8% and nothing more because the legislature has seen fit not to do anything more than that. Canada has 8 times as much solar as we do. New York has passed a law requiring that they get to 70% clean energy by 2030. Every state around us, New Jersey, actually, I forgot to change this. Delaware is also 50%. Maryland is 50%, DC, 100%. Virginia, again, I forgot to change this. This has gone up. It's 50% by 2030 and 100% carbon free by 2050. So every single state around us has passed laws requiring a much more aggressive transition. And because Pennsylvania is, as our previous governor, Tom Corbett, liked to say, the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, we have not moved 1 millimeter since Governor Rendell, really. So Reggie is the first significant state policy to move forward in a long time. So what do we have to do to get Reggie over the finish line? We have several final hurdles. The Senate is passed a law, Senate Bill 119. This bill will make it illegal for any governor to ever regulate carbon unless the legislature agrees. It has already passed the Senate. The House, House Bill 637, will run this fall. It is also expected to pass. Governor Wolf will veto these bills, and the job of all of us is to prevent a veto override. And this is where you come in, big time. Please call your state senator and representative and urge them to vote no on Senate Bill 119 or House Bill 637. There are also letters of disapproval that the both chambers have written and are planning to send. So any anti-Reggie effort is a no. So it's critically important that legislators hear overwhelmingly that their constituents do not want any more, we want a clean energy future. So it's really absolutely critical that people are in touch with their legislators. And I think that Nora's going to focus a little bit more on this. So thank you.
And we'll talking about that later in the hour.
Okay, great.
Liz, if you have, it looks like you have maybe 2 or 3 minutes before you absolutely have to leave. If anybody has any quick questions for Liz, if you could raise your hand in the down in the reactions button in the bottom of your Zoom window, then I can see that someone has their hand up and we can get a quick question to Liz. My one question, Liz, I'm not seeing any hands up. My one question, Liz, was those dollar figures for the health benefits look very, very large. Is that primarily due to simply the reduction in particulate matter and other things coming from burning fossil fuels?
Well, as I mentioned, asthma, chronic asthma is a very widespread disease in Pennsylvania. And it is if someone has chronic asthma, they are under care all the time. And it is the reduction in chronic illness that produces these benefits. The cost of healthcare is driven up, as you may know, by those who are chronically ill. So if we can reduce chronic illness, we can reduce healthcare costs for everyone. And this will also save lives. And I'm not exactly sure which diseases people are dying of. I don't know which, these 639 people, I don't know what diseases they are supposed to be dying of. But as climate change accelerates, heart condition, lung conditions, respiratory illness, and frankly, mental health illness is increasing in direct proportion. So there are a lot of healthcare costs that will be reduced by improving our air quality.
That's helpful. Judy Morgan, I see your hand up, Judy. You're muted, Judy. Judy, you're muted.
Hi, Liz. Sorry.
Hey, Judy, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, our legislators, as you know, Chris Robb and Art Hayward are pretty good on environment. Are there other legislators that we could encourage people to call that would be strategic?
Yes, there are 6 Democrats who have voted with the Republicans on Senate Bill 119. I'm sorry, I don't have time to put those in the chat. Here in our region, John Kane, who's a brand new legislator, is one of them. Let's see, Bill, I'll send you the list of those target legislators.
Liz, I have the list and I can share that later in the meeting with people.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
Good.
So what I would recommend, and frankly, Tina Tartaglione is one of them. She's in Philly. So I would recommend that we just bombard, all of these legislators with messages, even though they are not our legislators. It is critical that the governor's veto be upheld. We have to uphold the veto. That's the critical thing.
I noticed from the chat that we have a couple of attendees from Allegheny County, and 3 of the legislators who voted with the Republicans are from Allegheny. So we can also get our people in the western part of the state to pay attention to them as well.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm very glad to meet all of you and see old friends. So we'll be in touch.
If we get some more questions for you, Liz, we'll get them to you and try to get your responses back to people.
Sure, that's fine with me. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Okay, next up, I have Nora Elmarzouki, who's staff person with Power Interfaith, a interfaith organization which focuses on racial and economic justice in a clean and livable world. And Nora works as a climate justice organizer for Power. I've gotten to know her because I volunteer with Power. Well, they have a active group that is working on Reggie, and also one that is working on trying to reshape and reform the Public Utility Commission. So I've gotten to know Nora some through both those advocacy groups. Nora, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will make my best effort. I've downloaded your slides, or at least I've opened them up, and I will try to share my screen and display them. So be patient for a moment.
Thanks, Bill. And thank you for inviting me to be with you all tonight. I hope that I can provide you with some added benefits to tonight. Would you mind clicking present at the top corner, top right corner?
Top right corner.
Keep going down right below your arrow.
Here we go.
Great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how Reggie and climate justice are tied together. Next slide.
And advancing my slides. There we go.
So as Bill mentioned, POWER is a multiracial, multi-faith organization working for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. Next slide. The Climate Justice and Jobs team is one of 5 campaigns. Can you click the next one? So we're a part of 5 teams: Economic Dignity, the Live Free team, which addresses mass incarceration, education justice, and civic engagement. And that should say civic engagement, not civic education. So our vision is that we stand for people and the planet rather than unchecked profit. Can you go back? Sorry, Bill.
I'm sorry. There we go.
We stand for people and the planet rather than unchecked profit that damages human communities and our Earth. We lead our part of the great turning away from fossil fuel pollution and carbon as we build a solidarity economy that works for all. We fight against environmental racism and dirty energy and for healthy, green jobs and renewable, affordable energy. Black, brown, white, rich, or poor, all of us need clean air, water, energy, and a stable Earth. That's why we're building a powerful movement to ensure climate justice. Next slide. Our analysis is that seemingly isolated issues have shared roots in white supremacy and rampant capitalism. Next slide. Our strategy is to listen to the most impacted and centering their voices and experiences in the solutions for a just transition to a regenerative economy, which I'll speak about in a moment. It is about co-creating through activating communities. We represent the equity flank in environmental conversations and in the environmental flank in equity conversations. Next slide. Our values are respecting and listening, anti-racism, being allies in co-liberation, unity and diversity because differences are generative, spirit and action, both personal and political, inner and outer work is interconnected, and we grow as leaders as we grow a movement. Lastly, working from the ground up, real solutions have to be co-created by those most impacted by systems that marginalize and oppress. Next slide. So right here in front of us is how we think about is the just transition framework. This was produced by Movement Generation. And what it does is it's a framework for analyzing what is happening in our society and how do we move in a just way to a regenerative economy. I bring this up and bring this into this conversation because when we talk about Reggie, we're talking about it as a part of a just transition. We're talking about it as a part of a just transition. So part of this is being able to identify the ways that the extractive economy shows up in our lives. This includes looking at the ways that our labor is extracted, our natural resources are extracted. There's militarization in terms of governance. And moving toward, and this represents the fossil fuel industry that Reggie is meant to cap and invest. And we're hoping that that investment funds can go through the Clean Air Act to support a new regenerative economy. Next slide. So let's dive into a couple definitions. What actually is climate justice? Well, it focuses on the root causes of the climate crisis through an intersectional lens of racism, classism, economic injustice, and environmental harm. In this diagram, you can see all of the ways that climate intersects with existing inequities. Let's look at immigration status for a moment. Many folks who come to the US come as climate refugees, particularly from places like Puerto Rico, where many people have had to come to the mainland United States to escaping the ravages of the hurricane. We know that all of these things are interconnected with each other as we address the climate crisis. Next slide, please. Environmental justice, very connected, sometimes interchangeably used by climate justice, but they're slightly different. All people and communities of all races, cultures, and income have the right to equal environmental protection under the law and the right to live, work, and play in communities that are safe, healthy, and free of life-threatening conditions. Now, taking the last few slides in environmental and this slide, we can consider and think about the ways that we look at environment from a very holistic perspective. It is about the home, it is about the community, it's about the neighborhood in which one lives, and the ways in which not only do we face air pollution, water pollution, and land grabs, but we also face extraction of our labor, extraction of our resources in various ways that ultimately hurt the same people over and over again. Judy, I see your hand is raised.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that, but now I did it.
Okay. And please feel free if you have any questions, interrupt me. Then next slide, please. So why should we care about Reggie? Liz talked a lot about why we should care about Reggie, and this gives us a quick look at why we care about Reggie. Number one, it is a state cap and invest policy whose goals is to decrease carbon emissions from large electrification plants. Like I said, Liz has already gone through more of the nuances and technicalities of what this all means. The second aspect that we're particularly excited about is that Reggie is projected to raise lots of money and invest it through the Clean Air Act in Pennsylvania. You can see in this graph that comparing Reggie states to non-Reggie states, you see not only is there a decrease in carbon emissions, but there is an increase in gross domestic product. Next slide, please. Liz also touched on these. You know, when we talk about why do we care about Reggie, it's really important to consider the health benefits. So you can see here what some modeling demonstrates. This not only this saves people, communities a lot of money when it comes to not having to go to be hospitalized. There's you know, the number of kids with asthma. These are recurring health impacts that our communities face, particularly around many of these electric power plants that are going to be under the regional capped by the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Next slide, please.
I think, could that be the end of your set? Because it's not advancing. Let me see. There we go.
So power is a part of the Pennsylvania Climate Equity Table. This is a statewide table of organizations who work at the intersections with climate justice, from immigrant justice to working in coal communities and advocating for a just transition. So in working on Reggie and the PA Climate Equity Table, along with the Frontlines Table of the PA Clean Power Coalition, we have pushed for equity principles to be included in the Reggie rulemaking. Now, we weren't completely satisfied with how the rulemaking came about, but at least we were able to get these principles of equity into the preamble of the rulemaking. So number one, avoid, minimize, or mitigate any disproportionately adverse impacts on human health, especially in low-income communities and communities of color. So we must invest in air quality monitoring in disproportionately affected neighborhoods. Number two, authentically and inclusively gather public input and consider that input in the design and implementation of Reggie. Number three, equitably distribute environmental and economic benefits to disproportionately impacted communities. This means addressing legacy impacts related to emissions and pollution in vulnerable communities and populations, as well as providing access to investment programs regardless of income. And lastly, work to address a just transition for workers in the extractive energy economy towards short and long-term jobs that provide living wages for families, ensure retirement pensions, and create dignified working conditions. Now, number four truly highlights our intersectional approach to understanding and the implementation of the just transition framework in understanding how to address the climate crisis through an intersectional lens. Next slide, please. So what are we asking for? In energy justice communities may not see an immediate decrease in emissions. And the Center for Coalfield Justice has asked that the funds be spent on items that enhance the quality of EJ communities, environmental justice communities, such as, but not limited to, utility credits, green space development, education, a reduction of food deserts, lead removal of pipes and soil, affordable housing, and remediation of industrial sites. Next slide, please. So as Liz has mentioned earlier, there's the invest side of everything. And the estimate right now is that we could have about $300 million to invest in And so the Department of Environmental Protection has proposed these 5 categories: energy efficiency, clean and renewable energy, greenhouse gas abatement, general fund, and bill assistance. As the PA Climate Equity Table, we are advocating for 50% or at least 50% of the Reggie investments to be invested in environmental justice communities. Next slide, please. Now, there's a lot of opposition. Again, Liz mentioned a lot of this, but just to really quickly review, there are currently 2 resolutions of disapproval of Reggie that have passed in the House and Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. In addition, there are 2 anti-Reggie legislation bills, SB 119 and HB 637. It is critical that we follow what is happening with all of these. I'm currently still getting more of an understanding of what the timeline looks like for all of this. Lastly, and not this isn't lastly, actually, there's a big disinformation campaign. There's a lot of myths that are being put out there from the fossil fuel interests and some some labor groups that are pitting the environment against jobs, living wage jobs, and developed communities. Next slide, please. The last thing I'll say about opposition is it's important to follow the money. We know that there's at least 1 lobbyist per legislator of the state of Pennsylvania. We can see that these are the industries that lobby and donate to the Republican Party, which then put these bills forward. The other thing I would say that is in relation to the opposition is that I'm not going to go into the details of the Public Utility Commission, but they're the biggest regulator of energy and the 7,000 utilities across the state. And there's currently 1 vacant spot and a 2nd vacant spot opening up soon. And the Republican Party sent a letter holding the nomination for the PUC, for the Public Utility Commission seat, hostage because Reggie is an executive action that the governor is not putting through legislation, but rather as an executive action. So these are all things to consider in terms of the opposition and what is happening and the interconnections between these companies and lobbying groups and the political parties. This is not only the Republican Party, as Liz mentioned. There are Democrats who are also in opposition to Reggie. Next slide, please. So what can we do about this? There are all types of roles that one can take in order to address some of this. Let's start with base building, organizing. You can go about doing one-to-one people to know and understand a little bit more about Reggie and why it's important to our communities. We can address narrative. That means doing things like LTEs and op-eds and other storytelling, using our social media to put out narratives that support Reggie. We have electoralization implementation. Who is in power is important. We see that the Senate leadership in Lancaster holds great deal of power when it comes to these decisions. We have policy development, working with legislators to push policy, or for this matter of Reggie, with the governor's office. Additionally, there's direct action. What kinds of ways do we want to act in order to continue and push this Reggie policy forward? Next slide, please. So what can we do? The big thing is to organize your community. We just talked about roles, but these are concrete ways that you can do something to support Reggie. That includes, like I said earlier, doing one-to-ones with your family, friends, community members about Reggie, about how it's tied to climate change, how it helps, how it impacts our health, how we can invest that $300 million. Call or write to legislators, do lobby visits, bring community members with you. Make sure that we're letting our legislators know that we want Reggie and we want that investment into environmental justice communities. Like I said earlier, writing LTEs and op-eds, letters to the editor. These are ways to shape the narrative in the public sphere. You can do things like I'm doing right now, public talks, educate the public, or invite me or others to talk to your community about what we can do and what Reggie is and why it's important, particularly in the ways of environmental justice. And lastly, a very broad general thing, encourage citizens to vote for good government. These are all just a sample of the ways that we can organize our communities. Remember, who's in power really shapes, who's in power in the legislature really shapes what we can accomplish in terms of climate justice. And so you can go to the next slide. What I have for the next few slides, we don't really need to go into details per se, but these are just general talking points. One thing Bill and I talked about was, how do we talk about Reggie with other people and to get them on board? And so here I have a bunch of categories of topics that we could jump into, we could look at, we can read, and I'm happy to share these slides with you all. So here we have the climate change message. This is talking about how climate change is tied to the fossil fuel industry and the increase in temperatures and things like that. Next slide. The environment message. We emit a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. We're the third largest producer of coal, second largest natural gas, first largest corporate producer of natural gas. All of these things add to environmental injustices and environmental issues that we have in the state. Next slide. The jobs message. It is possible that we can have, we can invest in clean energy jobs. We can invest in supporting 27,000 jobs that can add $1.9 billion to the state's economy by 2030. There's a lot of ways that Reggie is tied that we can overcome the myths that pit jobs against environment. Next slide. We have a constitutional responsibility. Our legislators have a constitutional responsibility. It is a First Amendment right to clean air. Some of you might have seen that I believe it was Representative Metcalf made an argument that The mandate of masks is an impingement of our First Amendment rights to clean air. Yet he refuses to apply the same logic to our air as a whole. But really, the reality is we have a right to not only free speech in the press, freedom to worship, individual right to privacy, right to bear arms, right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and property rights, but a right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. So it is our legislators' constitutional responsibility to do more to protect our environment. Next slide, please. Repairing past harms. This is really about thinking about those who've been disproportionately impacted and how to ensure they see these investments. Next slide. And then there's the reinvest message. How do we want to see those funds being reinvested into our community? It's a wellness issue. We want our communities to be safe, healthy, and thriving. Next slide. Might be the last slide.
I think that's your last slide, Nora.
All right. I'm hoping that I didn't overlap too much with what Liz said, and this is an additional perspective on how to think about Reggie, particularly as it relates to environmental justice.
I think it's been a very helpful presentation, Nora, and I would guess some of our audience, some of our friends with us may have some questions or would perhaps like you to clarify some points.
Please.
I can't see everybody on the screen. Should I stop sharing or?
Yeah, you can stop share.
Okay, let's see if. Great. Okay, we're back together. Questions for Nora? Judy, your hand is still up. I don't know if that's a residual from earlier or.
I don't know, but I do have a question.
Oh, good.
I'd love to get a
Okay.
copy of the slideshow. Could you let us know your contact information to request that, or?
Yep. I just dropped my email in the chat.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question.
Please. go.
Yes, Richard?
So what is the next step in line here then for Reggie? Because I know the last one, I believe, was the, it went before the IRRC, and
Yep.
it was 3-2 in favor.
Yeah.
So what's the next step along here in the process?
So right now, Reggie Inc. is doing listening sessions. Reggie Inc. is who is responsible for the auction and the allocation of proceeds. There is supposed to be a public comment period. I'm not sure if there will be a public hearing, but public comment period on the investments portion that I believe would be submitted to the Department of Environmental Protection. There's also legislation that Senator Comita put forward to add to be able to redistribute, to take some of the Reggie investments and or Reggie money to invest in ways that they believe the Clean Air Act cannot do. So there's, we're not particularly in support of that legislation. We know it will not pass, but other than that, it doesn't do enough for environmental justice communities, and there are a lot of potential loopholes in it. So we're not particularly advocating for that legislation, although they're putting that legislation forward as like a give and take because of Reggie being in an executive action. The other thing that I think is coming up that's important is really connecting with our legislators and getting people in those hotspot districts that Liz is going to send us the list of, to let them know that we're in support of Reggie and they need to listen to constituents, and thinking about what do campaigns look like in those communities. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Also, Nora, I believe there's one final, as I understand it, there's one final administrative review, and that is that the Attorney General of Pennsylvania has a period of time to review the Reggie regulations and make a judgment that it's all in line with the Constitution of the state and is legal. And my understanding is that the Attorney General is very, very, very likely to say, yes, it is in compliance with the Constitution and state law. So I don't think that's going to be a hurdle. But this legislation that both Liz mentioned and that Nora mentioned, the State Bill 119, I think it is, that is going to come up. The companion House bill is House Bill
637.
657.
I think it's
Yeah,
637.
those are probably going to get combined into one, and they will go to the governor for his signature. He will veto them, but if those 6 Democrats continue to go with the Republicans, then at least in the Senate, they could overturn the veto. We need to peel off at least 2 or 3 of those Democrats who voted with the Republicans to convince them that they should stay with the governor and support Reggie. So I think, the challenge really is going to be, if you're not in the district of one of those people who voted in favor of this bill that it opposes Reggie, then I think even when you talk or write to your own senator, urging them to speak with and urge their fellow Democratic senators to not vote to overturn the veto is very important.
Thanks for that, Bill. When you send that list, can you also send it to our Reggie group? You're on that email list, right?
Yeah.
Our
Yes.
Reggie group. Can you send that
Yeah.
to us, please? That'll be very helpful.
Yeah, I could. I have the list right here for those who remain on the call. The ones that Liz mentioned in Delaware County, John Kane is a Democrat who voted with the anti-Reggie people. Christy Tartaglione in Northeast Philly, Senate District 2, is one who voted with the Republicans. And then out west in the Allegheny and Lackawanna County area, James Brewster, Marty Flynn, and Wayne Fontana, Brewster, Fontana, and Lindsey Williams are all in the Allegheny County area. And then in the Lackawanna, Luzerne area, Marty Flynn, that includes Scranton. So I think we have some active PA IPL members in the Scranton area. So I think certainly for PA IPL, we're going to be urging them to be in touch with Marty Flynn about his support for Reggie.
Yeah.
I guess I'm interested, something Nora and I had talked about was, as you're contemplating writing or emailing your senator or your House of Representative person, from what you've heard about Reggie, what would you all think would be the strongest arguments to persuade those who may be unpersuaded that they ought to be supportive of Reggie? Do you have thoughts in those areas?
Time is running out. economic benefits to the state are large.
Greg, I think you're absolutely right. Yes, Richard?
Well, I mean, the Reggie applies to coal-fired power plants. And these power plants are on their way out anyway. So, you know, the transition is already happening. And so it's just a matter of stepping things up, which is what Reggie's all about, but stepping it up in the right direction by producing jobs, contributing to the GDP of the state. And of course, all the cuts to emissions. So I see that as, you know, the fact that it's coal's a dying industry anyway. So there's no reason to continue to support that.
I think you're correct, Richard, although I mean that cost per ton will also apply to gas-fired generation. So that there are fewer tons of CO2 per megawatt for gas-fired power plants, but it will also have an impact on them. Some of the older gas-fired plants that are less efficient and more costly may be impacted, I think. But you're right, it would primarily accelerate the demise of the coal-fired plants.
What about the human beings?
I think absolutely the health benefits and the you know, how reducing pollution benefits all of us from a health standpoint is hugely significant, I think. Doug, did I see your hand going up or? No, okay.
I have
Judy?
a question, Bill. In terms of making the argument about jobs, which does seem like it would be a really good one to make, is there some report that we could refer to? Is that something you could, is there any resource, any economic analysis that we could point to? I think the DEP did their own, but I'm not sure.
I've seen the total figures that both Liz and Nora cited. I have not seen a breakdown beyond that, but that's a good question. I think, you know, it would be useful if we had more detail on the beneficial jobs impact. Nora, are you aware of any analysis of that?
Yeah, there definitely is analysis on that. I am sure I have it somewhere, like more detailed in my notes in the presentation. There are some highlights for it, but there is definitely some documentation out there, and I'll be sure to get it to you.
That would be great.
Super.
Yes, there are other states. New Jersey was one of them, but I think they then became legislative. And the problem with that, sorry, my kid just like tickled me. The problem with that means that the governor who doesn't want to be in Reggie can take us out of Reggie, which is what happened in New Jersey. I can't remember what other states, if any, also did it by executive action, but I feel like there was.
Suzanne, did you have a question? I see your hand up.
When you said how could we convince them? And I think that also the health benefits are enormous, and that would be something that I would probably mention in a lobbying effort. I mean, it's something that our representatives in our government have a responsibility to care about.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Quick question, Amani, have you been able to get people's contact information, or at least you know who was here? So if we want to follow up to get people information, we can do that.
Yes, I recorded everyone's names. And then anyone I put their emails in the chat, I was able to get those. But I'm sure we can get, we're able to get everyone's contact information.
Okay. I have a question for those who are still with us. Have you all had any experience with either emails or letters or lobby visits with our Pennsylvania senators or representatives? Maybe just a quick show of hands if you've been in touch with them on either environmental or climate or other issues. Good. Great. Yeah, I've found that the Pennsylvania Senate and House website is actually pretty supportive of that kind of contact. Even if you don't know your senator or your representative, you can go to the Pennsylvania, you can Google Pennsylvania State Senate, and one of the links there is find your representative, and it brings up a page. You put in your address, and it brings up a page that shows both your member of the General Assembly, the so-called House, and the Senate. And it, in my case, it also brought up and showed me who my federal congressperson was and what congressional district I was in.
Great.
And then you can, click through to that representative, and on the senators and the representatives websites, there are phone numbers, and in the ones I've looked at, there's also a link for sending the representative an email. So it's very straightforward to get a message to your senator or to your representative on whether it's Reggie or another issue that you care about deeply. So I would certainly encourage people to do that and use the information that we've gotten today to make a strong argument that they should be supporting Reggie. I think, to summarize, I believe that those Democrats who voted with the fossil fuel interests to oppose Reggie are ones who probably had a lot of pressure from labor unions in their area. Think the pipe fitters and steam fitters and other labor unions that work in coal-fired power plants and to some extent in the gas infrastructure are putting pressure on Democratic representatives to oppose Reggie, claiming that it's going to result in loss of jobs in those industries. And as Richard said, at least in the coal industry, we're losing those jobs anyway, so we ought to be trying to get a benefit out of the fact of losing them, and Reggie provides a lot of that benefit. And there's also some of the money within Reggie can be used for workforce development. I think Liz, in her meetings with Senator Kane in Delaware County, has made that argument with his staff, and they really perked up when she pointed out very clearly that there's workforce development money that will be coming out of Reggie, and that is a pretty effective way to counteract some of the arguments made by the labor unions in opposition to Reggie. So I think using that argument is a good one with your senator or your representative. I think, Nora, do you have any closing comments, or do anybody have any remaining questions while we're still on the line? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Thank you all very much for being with us. And Amani, you wanted to make a brief announcement, I think, about the next statewide IPL meeting and also the conference coming up in November.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bill. I'm gonna drop the registration links in the chat, but I just wanted to talk very quickly about some upcoming events with PA IPL. Firstly, our statewide monthly meeting, our next monthly meeting is going to be Monday, September 20th. So this upcoming Monday at 7 p.m. If you're interested in being a part of that call, I've put the link in the chat. On Sunday, September 19th, PA IPL and the Jewish Earth Alliance are going to be hosting a call specifically on letters and writing, very related to what we're talking about as far as reaching out to senators and legislators and making our voice heard. We're going to have Rob Altenberg, Senior Director for Energy and Climate for Penn Future, speaking with us. He recently wrote a report about subsidies for fossil fuels, and the topic is going to be no more tax breaks for fossil fuels. And Phyllis, please let me know if there's anything you want to add. There's the link in the chat for that as well. And then lastly, Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light is currently planning a conference. We're going to have topics and speakers from Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh. We're just asking you to save the date. It's going to be November 14th, and we're going to have more information to be announced, and that will all be given to you guys via email. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Amani. Nora, thank you for being with us. Thanks those who hung in all the way through, and I hope the information has been helpful. And if you'd like to copy me on your emails to your senator or representative, I would love to collect what people are submitting and share that among us for people who are still working on their drafts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Have
Nora.
a good night as well.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.